The Clayton brothers just pulled off the kind of discovery prospectors dream about. A $60 million jackpot buried in the dirt of a place most people wrote off decades ago. Forgotten Valley, once dismissed as tapped out, has suddenly become the hottest patch of ground on the map. Locals can't believe it. Investors are circling. And the brothers? They're sitting on a claim that just rewrote their future. What makes this even wilder is how it happened. While others chased high-tech exploration and flashy digs, the Claytons went old school, boots in the mud, picks in hand, sifting through ground nobody wanted. Turns out persistence pays. Their strike isn't just another nugget find, it's a full-scale deposit rich enough to put them in the record books. Word spread fast. Rumors of gold dust, massive veins, and untouched pockets lit up the mining community. Overnight, Forgotten Valley is swarming again. Some call it luck. Others say it's proof the land still has secrets left to give. But one thing's clear. The Clayton brothers didn't just hit gold, they hit history. Before we dive, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. The Forgotten Valley stretches out like a wound carved into the earth, silent, smothered by mist, untouched since the roaring days of the Klondike. Creeks coil through black spruce, their waters whispering secrets of fortunes long lost, and the wind drags across ridges where no birds dare linger. To outsiders, it's just wilderness, but to those who know the stories, the valley is something else entirely, a graveyard of ambition. Local legends say entire mining camps disappeared here, their cabins swept away by sudden floods, their men swallowed by landslides that came without warning. Survey maps, usually precise down to the last creek bend, show eerie gaps around this stretch of land, as if the cartographers themselves avoided even putting pen to paper. Old-timers gave it a name that clings to this day, the valley that eats men. Riches might lie beneath, they warned, but any fool bold enough to claim them would be destroyed. And yet, in this place no miner dared touch. For more than a century, the growl of diesel shatters the silence. The Clayton brothers arrive not as wanderers, but as conquerors, massive excavators churning through frozen earth, fuel trucks rumbling in behind them, their crew planting flags like an army, staking a battlefield. Against the backdrop of curse and legend, their ambition rings louder than the warnings of the dead. The camera shifts to faded black and white photographs. Gaunt men lean against sleds in waist-deep snow, their faces carved by frost and desperation. These were the stampeders of 1898, the last to test the valley's wrath. They scrawled notes about gold so rich it glittered through shallow pans. Nuggets the size of a man's thumb, one entry brags. But those words were the last anyone heard from them. Their names vanish from records as if erased. Whispers spread in Dawson that claim maps were stolen, that gunfights lit up the midnight camps, that graves were dug in secret under piles of frozen stone. A diary recovered from a survivor paints the valley as alive, tunnels groaning and collapsing like a beast shaking men from its back. The Claytons read these stories not as warnings, but as challenges. Where others saw curses, they saw proof. Proof that the gold was real. Proof that men had glimpsed it and died trying to take it. And that hunger, that fever, is what drives them deeper into the valley's shadows. But hunger alone doesn't fuel excavators. To unlock the valley, the brothers stake everything they own. Bank loans, fuel contracts, mortgages, they put it all on the line. Trucks roll in carrying $500,000 worth of steel, pumps, and wash plants, every bolt gleaming with the weight of debt. Rivals shake their heads in laughter, scoffing that Forgotten Valley is nothing but permafrost and ghosts, a place where better men failed and vanished. But for the Claytons, this isn't just another claim. This is a wager of identity. Their names, their reputations as miners, their very future stand on the line. And so the gamble became motion. Excavators roared to life, their steel teeth grinding into the frozen walls of the forgotten valley. The permafrost was like stone, harder than anything the crew had fought before, sparks leaping as bucket teeth clashed against the ground's icy armor. Every scoop felt like a battle, the machines straining, engines howling as though the land itself resisted intrusion. Yet, as the shovels bit deeper, the earth began to yield strange relics. A broken lantern, its glass long fogged with frost, rusted nails, bent and twisted, splintered timbers, remnants of shafts dug by hands more than a century ago. The past was rising from the ground in jagged fragments, reminding the brothers that others had stood here before them, and failed. Then disaster struck. A rumble shuddered through the ground, deep and guttural, and without warning a hidden ice vein burst. Water gushed into the cut in torrents, icy and relentless, swallowing the trenches in minutes. Men shouted, scrambling for higher ground as pumps were rushed into place. The scene mirrored the old legends too perfectly. The disasters whispered in Dawson bars for decades. Men drowned in their own cuts, valleys flooding without warning, the mountain itself fighting back. Crew members exchanged terrified glances, muttering under their breath about curses. Fear etched into every face. Some workers wondered aloud if the forgotten valley had waited 100 years to punish the next generation of dreamers. But the Claytons were unshaken. Soaked to the bone, boots sunk in slush, they pushed forward. The gamble was no longer about digging pay dirt. It had become a war between men, and a land determined to keep its secrets buried. Their machines pumped, dug, and clawed again, refusing to yield. To turn back now would mean defeat, not just of the season, but of their very name. The valley tested them, but the Claytons roared back, steel against stone, man against myth. When the water finally subsided and digging resumed, the ground began to show its first promise. A single pan filled with gravel was swirled, water cutting a spiral through the black sand. At first, only flecks glinted, then more, and then more still, until the pan glittered with yellow. Gold flakes clung to the edges like stars caught in orbit. The crew leaned in, eyes wide, disbelief giving way to jubilation. Whoops and shouts echoed off the valley walls as rough hands slapped backs and fists punched the air. No one had expected this much this soon. This wasn't a tease. This was real pay. Word spread quickly through the camp. Every test pan came back richer than the last. Geologists bent over gravel samples, their voices strained with awe as they confirmed what the Claytons had suspected all along. Beneath the valley floor lay an ancient, untouched channel sealed off by time and ice. A mother lode beyond imagination. As gravel flowed through the wash plant, the sluice mats caught not just flakes, but visible nuggets, some the size of marbles, others like old coins pressed flat. Early cleanups shimmered with color, raw gold spilling over pans until it coated gloves, too thick to wipe away. Hope turned to fever. Men who had arrived doubtful now worked with frantic energy, their fatigue erased by adrenaline. The valley that had once seemed cursed now pulsed with the glow of promise. Forgotten Valley was revealing itself not as a graveyard, but as a kingdom of riches. Perhaps the very jackpot whispered of in Yukon saloons for over a century. Each shovel load, each cleanout, only fanned the fire higher. The Claytons knew they had found the opening crack in a vault of unimaginable wealth, but gold never stays secret for long. Word of their discovery spread beyond the valley, trickling first into Dawson bars, then exploding like wildfire across the mining community. Rivals who once mocked the brothers now prowled for information. Some sent hired eyes to photograph equipment from distant ridges. Others slipped notes under tents offering crew members cash to defect. The valley's gold fever began to poison the air beyond its borders. Then came sabotage. A fuel shipment, scheduled to arrive at dawn, never appeared. Weeks of coordination undone, machines idled for lack of diesel, and suspicions flared. Was it bad luck, or had a competitor intercepted their supply lines? Crew members cursed into radios, voices cracking with frustration as precious hours of mining slipped away. The Claytons knew they had enemies now, not just rival miners, but corporate sharks circling like wolves that smelled blood. By nightfall, the valley grew more sinister. Security cameras perched on poles above the cut caught shadows slipping through the tree line. Strangers prowled the claim boundaries, flashlights darting across the ground, as though searching for weak spots, unmarked corners, or the chance to stake stolen ground. The valley that had once been a place of natural curses now crawled with human predators, hungrier and more ruthless than any storm or flood. The Claytons' response was swift and fierce. Fences rose, guards patrolled, radios crackled with alerts through the night. They spoke of their claim not as ground, but as treasure that needed defending at all costs. Forgotten Valley had become a battlefield, and the brothers its commanders. Outlaws in spirit, miners in truth, they tightened their grip on every inch of dirt, every barrel of fuel, every ounce of gold clawed from the earth. Because they knew one thing with certainty. In this valley, fortune and ruin marched hand in hand, and only those strong enough to guard what they had won would live to see the end of the season. That vigilance bought them time, and time turned into pay. With rivals held at bay and every sluice running day and night, cleanup day in the Forgotten Valley no longer looked like the tired ritual of miners, scraping together a few ounces of dust and praying for better luck next week. Here, cleanup tables overflowed. Nugget after nugget rattled across steel, piling like loose change poured from a king's treasury. Dust drifted in golden clouds, coating pans, mats, and even the boots of men who stomped through the wash plant floor. The sluices clogged under sheer volume, water choking against the weight of coarse gold, too heavy to wash down. What had once been a trickle was now a flood, gold flowing like water, unstoppable, unyielding. The men who worked these lines stared in disbelief, their hands trembling as they scooped handfuls of the glowing metal, hardly able to comprehend what fortune had chosen them. Bars were poured in makeshift molds, hot gold running in molten streams that hissed and spat as it cooled. Each bar glowed like captured sunlight, stacked inside shipping crates until they looked like bricks from some mythical palace. The crew stood around the stacks in reverent silence, roughneck miners suddenly humbled by the scale of what they were seeing. Some wept quietly, others laughed like madmen, but all understood the truth. They weren't just workers anymore. They were part of history, part of a strike that future generations would speak of with awe. Each tally grew larger, weekly numbers reaching into realms no miner alive had seen before. The Forgotten Valley, long dismissed as cursed, now shimmered with the promise of legend. It wasn't a claim anymore. It was a modern El Dorado, and they were the ones who had unlocked it. By mid-season, the fever reached heights no one could have predicted. Gold tallies didn't just climb. They exploded, vaulting into the tens of millions. Each cleanup seemed to double the last, the numbers growing so outrageous, even Discovery producers scrambled to rewrite scripts and schedules. What had begun as another season of mining reality TV was now something else entirely. A once-in-a-lifetime spectacle that cameras could barely keep pace with. Banks called incessantly, investors flew in from Toronto, Vancouver, and even overseas, waving contracts, begging for a stake in the river of gold pouring out of the valley. But not everyone came with open hands. Rivals ground their teeth in fury, watching from afar as rumors spread that the Claytons' haul had already surpassed both Tony Beats and Parker Schnabel combined. To some, this was sacrilege, the established kings of the Yukon being dethroned by brothers who had staked everything on a forgotten claim. To others, it was inspiration, proof that the old dream wasn't dead, that there were still jackpots waiting if a man dared to gamble everything. Yet envy burned hotter than admiration, and eyes sharpened as more hands reached for what the Claytons had unearthed. The valley itself transformed almost overnight. Journalists descended with cameras flashing, reporters scribbling feverishly about the strike of the century. Tourists caravanned up rough dirt roads, desperate to snap a photo near the gates of the claim. Merchants followed, hawking food, tools, and cheap souvenirs to anyone who'd buy. Rival miners camped nearby, watching, scheming, whispering of strategies to claw a share of the glory. Forgotten Valley, once a place of silence and superstition, now buzzed like a boomtown reborn, the kind of frenzied madness not seen since the Klondike Rush itself. Through it all, the Claytons stood tall. They were no longer just miners clawing survival from the earth. They were kings presiding over an empire of yellow metal. The weight of wealth bent the air around them, made their names thunder through saloons, and turned their claim into a throne. But with that throne came pressure. Every eye in the Yukon was on them now. Every rival wanted their downfall. Every corporation wanted their claim. They knew the valley had given them power, but in the same breath it had painted a target on their backs. Then came the moment that would etch their story forever. The final weigh in. The crew gathered around the scales, cameras rolling, voices hushed in anticipation. Bucket after bucket of raw gold was poured out, nuggets spilling like gravel, the clink of metal against metal echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. The numbers climbed higher, higher still, until disbelief rippled across every face. When the final tally hit, the valley seemed to fall silent, as though even the land itself acknowledged the milestone. $60 million in raw gold. Not projected, not rumored, confirmed. Stacks of bars lined the tables, their combined weight so great the steel shelves bent under the burden. Crew members openly wept, their rough faces streaked with tears, realizing they had lived through something no miner alive could match. The Claytons stood stunned, speechless, their voices caught in their throats. They had done the impossible. They had dragged fortune out of a valley that had consumed every man before them. And the world noticed. Headlines screamed of the strike, newspapers and networks declaring Forgotten Valley, one of the richest modern finds since the Klondike itself. For the Claytons, the jackpot wasn't just wealth, it was immortality. Their names had been carved into Yukon history, etched in gold heavier than any monument. Forgotten Valley was no longer forgotten. It was a legend reborn, and they were the men who had given it life again. But legends never rise without a price. The glow of 60 million in gold could not wash away the shadows creeping back into Forgotten Valley. Machines that had purred all season suddenly failed with violent spasms. Engines seizing, belts snapping, sluices collapsing beneath their own weight. Excavator buckets sheared off pins, sending tons of gravel tumbling in landslides that nearly swallowed men whole. Workers whispered it wasn't chance. Too many close calls, too many accidents stacked together, as if the valley itself had grown restless beneath their triumph. The Claytons poured money into repairs, but no wrench could fix the unease spreading through camp. At night the men woke screaming, drenched in sweat, swearing they'd dreamed of drowning, not in water, but in rivers of molten gold closing over their heads. Others muttered about faces in the tree line, pale and watching, gaunt shapes of old prospectors who had perished chasing the same prize. A superstition began to bloom, unspoken at first, but undeniable. The valley demanded payment for its treasure. The fear turned sharper when the tallies stopped matching. Buckets brought to cleanup seemed lighter than they should have been, the scales whispering smaller numbers than the eye could see. Missing gold, lost, misplaced, stolen, or worse, consumed by something no man could name. Arguments broke out, suspicion breeding like mold in damp corners. Men who once laughed together now locked their tents at night, guarding their share. The Claytons, rich beyond their wildest dreams, found themselves glancing over shoulders, uneasy even when holding the gleam of bars in their hands. It was as though every ingot carried a curse etched deeper than its shine, each fortune bartering with something unseen beneath the dirt. Yet the world beyond camp didn't care for curses. Newspapers screamed headlines of a miracle strike, dubbing it the $60 million miracle of Forgotten Valley. The Claytons' faces appeared on front pages, their names spoken alongside the giants of Yukon lore. Carmack, Skookum Jim, Beats, Schnabel. They weren't just miners anymore. They were folk heroes, the new kings of Klondike gold. Abandoned saloons along Dawson's main street flickered back to life, doors swinging open for caravans of tourists who came with wallets, fat, and eyes hungry for a glimpse of legend. Merchants flooded the valley with trucks of supplies, hawking trinkets, gear, and whiskey at prices fit for a new gold rush. The brothers were immortalized in documentaries, hailed by producers as the heirs to a lost empire, while rivals, long accustomed to their own crowns, watched with clenched fists and bitter envy. But even as the boomtown fever pulsed, the valley itself stood like a dark sentinel. Its ridgelines loomed, indifferent to headlines, uncaring of tourists snapping pictures. The land gave no applause for the gold ripped from its veins. In the shadows between the trees, it seemed to whisper the same warning: this story isn't finished. The Claytons could taste it too, that uneasy sense of standing on the edge of something far greater and far more dangerous than they had bargained for. Surveyors brought back maps that deepened the mystery. Beneath the cuts already mined, seismic echoes suggested channels running deeper, richer, far more vast than the surface glory they had touched. Geological models hinted at the unthinkable: an underground vault, a motherlode that could dwarf even the fortune already hauled to the scales. 10 times richer, maybe more. The Claytons stared at the data, their minds torn between greed and dread. To chase that depth would mean years more, machines stronger, risks greater. And in every meeting, the old-timers who wandered back into Dawson spat their warnings: don't dig too deep. The valley takes more than it gives. Those words rang with a weight that numbers couldn't erase. Still, temptation was a fire that gold always stoked. The brothers found themselves debating late into the night whether they'd merely brushed the dust off something so immense it could rewrite not just their own legacy, but the history of gold mining itself. Was the jackpot they'd declared really an ending, or only the first page of a saga that would pull them into depths no miner had returned from? As the season closed, the valley lay quiet, snow beginning to fall over stripped earth and silent machines. The headlines still screamed of fortune, tourists still crowded the outskirts, and the Claytons still stood on piles of wealth, but none of it felt like closure. Forgotten Valley seemed to breathe under the frost, a sleeping giant whose heart still pulsed with hidden veins of gold. The story ended not with triumph, nor with defeat, but with a promise. Somewhere deeper in the shadows of that cursed ground, the greatest jackpot might still be waiting. Untouched, silent, patient. The valley still slept, and its dreams were gilded in a treasure too vast for any man to hold without cost.